Morning Year 12, welcome to your second part to the chimney sweep videos. This time of course we are going to take a look at the chimney sweeper from experience. Now as this is the companion poem, obviously, your paired poem, there are going to be some quite striking parallels. However, as this is a song of experience, there are certainly going to be lots of differences as well. I mean, just take a look at that artwork. I've blown it up nice and large for you there for the chimney sweeper of experience. Just the colour choices, just the colour schemes, the brush strokes, even the lack of definition that's warranted to the child. It looks like a black thing amongst the snow, okay, which is literally the first line of the poem. A black thing, that lack of recognition of identity that's warranted to the child. The colour is of course symbolic, and there's so much you could say about the illustration alone, but for now let's give it a little read. A little black thing amongst the snow, crying, weep, weep, in notes of woe. Where are their father and mother? Say, they are both gone up to the church to pray. Because I was happy upon the heath and smiled among the winter snow, they clothed me in the clothes of death and taught me to sing the notes of woe. And because I am happy and dance and sing, they think they have done me no injury and are gone to praise God and priest and king, who make up a heaven of our misery. Wow, so this poetic voice is clearly much more overt in their criticisms of not only parental figures but also the twin mills of oppression, the church and the monarchy, which are quite literally referenced, called out in the penultimate line. Okay, priest and king. What I would like you to do, before I go ahead and give you some clear analysis and discussion points for this poem, is to take a little bit of ownership in the starting activity and to complete for me a you do. So there are 5 subtle references to key points in the poem that I want you to go ahead and find and highlight and to start making some analysis and some notes on in your poem. So give yourself 10 minutes. 10 minutes should be more than enough for this. I like to think my instructions are pretty self-explanatory and they are guiding you towards the key quotes in this poem. So you should be absolutely fine. So please go ahead and have some confidence and highlight in your anthology and start to make some notes. So go ahead and pause this video now for about 10-12 minutes whilst you have a go at these guided annotations. Okay, so welcome back. Hopefully you were able to find what I was alluding to in these little points of analysis, and let's just go ahead now, and have a go at talking about them together. So the first one says, where is the vague pronoun in line 1, and what does it suggest about the plight of children in Blake's time? Well, I felt this was fairly obvious. I mean, it's right at the start of the poem. Openings, beginnings are always deeply significant as they foreground and they establish. And there are two things that are established here. That is, number one, the vague pronoun is, of course, the thing, the little black thing, if you want the full phrase. The epithet that's sort of awarded to define the child. And of course, thing is dehumanizing. So what's foregrounded, what's established here is the dehumanizing power of child labour for these young chimney sweeps. Okay, so this child is no longer awarded a voice. The child is not the poetic voice, but is asked or interviewed by an unknown voice. And this sort of omniscient perspective at the beginning defines the child as the little black thing. So what is being suggested there? Well, of course, it's the loss, it's the tarnishing, it's the decaying of innocence. Okay, that's clearly what's being suggested there in contrast. The snow, of course, is purity, is childhood, is youth and innocence, and the staining of their face and body and clothing from the soot of the chimney sweeps is of course symbolic for that loss of innocence and that corruption of imagination. of a creative imagination. So clearly the plight of children is abject here. That, you know, the suggestion of exploitation and poverty, dehumanization, marginalization, just to name a few of our sort of social and political protest terms. The second task asked you, where is the use of contrast in line 1 and what's its impact? I do feel that I've answered that in my last little moment, but I'll just reiterate. It's clearly the contrast in colour, okay, between the black and the white. They are binary oppositions, okay, so we have a reminder again of the contraries, the lack of balance there that is not being achieved in those binary oppositions and juxtapositions. The next one was, where are the sweep's father and mother, and why is the location ironic? Well, where they are is at the church to pray. Okay, it was there in line 4. Now, this for me is deeply ironic, and this is Blake's satire coming through once again, because the father and mother, rather than directly remedying the child's woe and exploitation, are forced through the cycle of poverty. Now remember, we're not here to blame those parents, those lower working class parents, especially not through a Marxist lens, because they are not fully accountable here. They are pushed into this cycle of poverty and unfortunately had to on many occasions, as I said before, sell their children. Okay, sold me. My father sold me, it says in Songs of Innocence. So they have gone to the church because in their limited power, they feel that the only power they have is to implore God for protection. And again, that is another criticism of the church, of institutionalized religion, that peddles this idea that happiness, liberation, freedom can only be achieved by following a highly religious path, often a highly oppressive and binding path, and therefore finding freedom in death, in heaven. Okay, so that's why that's ironic, deeply ironic there as well. The next one was, what poignant metaphor is used in the second stanza and what does it suggest? Well, hopefully you got there. It was the clothes of death. They clothed me in the clothes of death. Now, they there, guys, whilst it's another vague pronoun, for me that's society. They is society. Society is accountable. Society and its institutions, okay, along with, of course, the adults in their life. But that's what's going on there. The clothes of death is the attire they wear for their chimney sweeping, but of course it's also the blackening that cakes their skin as like a second skin or sort of a piece of attire. And then in the final stanza, how does Blake claim society remains ignorant to the plight of children? Well, it's this whole section in the latter half where the child exclaims, "It's because I'm happy and I dance and sing, they think they've done me no injury," and then they go to praise God and priest and king. Now, because children were largely resilient, I mean, children are largely resilient, they don't tend to hold on to sadness, woe, pain. They move past it in their innocence and optimism. The child claims here that makes them a ripe target for exploitation. It allows their adult counterparts to exploit them and not feel a sense of shame and guilt in doing so. Okay, and so at the end, and the ending line is so key. The child claims it's those adults, that run those institutions, especially, that make up a heaven of our misery. Okay, they're able to justify, to move outside of responsibility, because the children are these key targets, easy targets for exploitation. Okay, so we're going back to that aspect of social and political protest writing, year 12, that is abuse of power. Okay, so I would write that at the top of my poem. The key social and political protest aspect that we're looking at here is abuse of power. Okay, here are some key notes that I want you to take down that I think are worth reiterating and in writing in your anthologies. So here we go. Ooh, I'm going to put all the transitions at the same time. They're not in the right order. Okay, so the first thing that I think is really important that you need to know is that Blake can be seen to be labelled as a social realist. Okay, so many artists, writers, filmmakers were deemed social realists. So it kind of does what it says on the tin. It's the idea that through their art, they are holding up a mirror to their contemporary world. So Blake certainly does that within his poem, with his poetry as a whole, in his whole collection. But it's not quite as simple as that. As you can see from my notes there, Blake believed in the primacy of the inner life, of the individual over the socially constructed, okay, and thereby oppressive view of the observed world. So let me break that down to you. As a romantic poet, what he really prioritised was this idea of our inner emotions, our imagination, our creativity, our feelings to feel the world, our subjectivity. And so he believed in that primacy of that inner world, and that was really, really, for him, important. Okay? And so what he didn't believe in, or what he didn't seek to sort of prioritize in his life, was everything outside of the inner world. So all of those constructions, the education system, the church, the state, the government, the monarchy, so all of those key terms, all of those external realities he viewed as oppressive. Okay, what was really the truth of life was the inner self, the primacy of the inner self. So whilst that's all true, and I mean, let's not discount the fact that his work is full of symbolism and creativity, and it's very much, you know, full of spirituality and you know, higher feelings. It's still very much grounded in his world and his contemporary world, and he certainly holds that mirror up. Okay, so whilst he works with metaphor, imagery, symbolism, and the primacy of the inner life in the individual, he is still attuned to the contemporary world. And that's why this poem for me is one of his greatest works of social realism. Okay, so really important that you wrap your head around that. Take a moment to pause if you need to now. So what are we talking in terms of context? We're talking about the church again. And this phrase is worth writing down in the second bullet point here. The church was complicit, involved, responsible in the plight of these children. And, you know, the priest and the king were certainly profiting from child labour, and that is where we get this link to social realism. Okay, this reality that is very thinly veiled, if not veiled at all, to be honest, in this Experience poem. Okay, I'd call it overt. It's there, I can see it, it's palpable. Now, we spoke about this already, but I want to make it clear here. Excuses abound. Okay, so these parental figures claim that because the children are resilient, they are deemed strong enough to withstand their exploitation. Okay, and what's the result of that? Well, it's what Jean-Jacques Rousseau said, okay, which was, of course, that society creates chains for these children. That is the outcome, okay, here, right here, okay, of all of this. So the last thing to say is we have a nice little link here to Nurse's song from Experience, and I think that's worth writing down in your anthology as well, and that is conflict, that good old theme of conflict, and the conflict between the generations here, okay, between the parents, the children, the adults of those institutions as well. So conflict between the generations is great also. Okay, lastly then, what I've got for you is a small task that I want you to have a go at writing a paragraph for me. And this will take you the last 15 minutes of the session. But I wanted to remind you of one of the great romantic poets that shares so much in common with Blake, and that was William Wordsworth. And a quote that I would write down and I would just have close to my heart and I would remember is the fact that he often declared that good poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. Write that down. So what I want you to have a go at is considering what powerful feelings means here in the two Chimney Sweep poems. So I've asked you, and write this question down, what powerful feelings does Blake evoke in the paired poems studied? Okay, so this will just be a simple speed paragraph with some evidence from the poems in there. What sorts of feelings are we talking about? Okay, what powerful feelings are evoked? Now, just to remember, much of the Romantic poetry really truly invited the reader to identify with the characters, with the protagonists, along with the poets themselves. Okay, so this chimney sweep, or the chimney sweeps in both poems, you really have to imagine that they represent, real individuals. Let them have that status, let them have that life. A lot of his characters, along with the characters within Romantic poetry, were non-conformists and outcasts, and I really think that the chimney sweeper in here is evoking lots of emotions that I would align with being an outcast. Okay, so feelings of alienation, exploitation, abhorrence for the institutions. So just remember that. Is the protagonist here an isolated rebel? I think for a child they are saying things that are deeply rebellious. So consider all of that in terms of the powerful feelings evoked, and rebellion needs to be at the heart of this answer. Okay, so 15 minutes, year 12, to have a go at this, and then obviously that means you've got a nice little summative paragraph in your exercise books. So that's everything for today, because you are doing a couple of written tasks for me. Just a quick note, next lesson will be The Little Vagabond. Okay, so do make sure that you give it a read before you click on to my next video, that will probably be aired next week. Lots of love to you all. Hope you're keeping well. Please check in with me if you need anything, and thank you for your essays. Hopefully they're all marked and back to you by now.